What would make you leave your 23-year career in administration to start a brand new venture, something that you seemingly are not qualified for? It's not something you studied for. Well, our guest today is going to tell us why she did it. And trust me, you want to hear her story, because not only will it inspire you, I believe someone here is going to get some instruction to do something that you've been putting off doing for a long time. Let's go.
Welcome to the Monetize Your Ministry podcast.
And you get a chance to interact with them. To me, that's full-time ministry.
Only that I have to, because task without business is like a thief. It brings in itself and then it opens.
I want to provide content and things that are going to help change lives, and I simultaneously want to receive a blessing from that.
Now here's your host, Kymone Hans.
Hey, Monetize Your Ministry family. So glad that you're back for this exciting episode. You know, one of the things I love to do on this podcast is share stories, because I believe in sharing stories. You can see yourself in someone else's story. You can see your struggles. You can see the things that you've been sitting on. You can see someone else using it, and it can inspire you to make that move. And so I'm so glad today I'll be sharing with you a story that has been inspirational for me. Before I go any further, I do want to encourage you to make sure you subscribe to this podcast. If you haven't done so already, go to YouTube, look up at Monetize Your Ministry, and subscribe to this podcast. And if you're listening to this podcast on a podcasting platform, do the same. Subscribe, check it out, share it with someone so that we can continue to get this message out here. All right, I want to introduce our guest today, and I want to give her a little bit of bio introduction, and then we'll get into the conversation. So our guest today is Dorian Stewart. She's a dynamic leader with over 23 years of experience as a successful healthcare manager, where she excelled in leadership, organization, and innovation. Right? 23 years. For a lot of us, I mean, you're just thinking about getting to the end of the road with retirement and stuff, right? But her career trajectory took an unexpected yet divine turn when she and her husband welcomed their beautiful adoptive daughter into their lives. This profound life change inspired Dorian to step away from her corporate career and embrace a new purpose, empowering children and families through faith-based resources. She's the CEO. She's the founder of Dorian Inspires LLC. She's a visionary author, illustrator behind the acclaimed Promise Pal series, a collection of 10 books and 2 devotional coloring books designed to instill confidence, biblical affirmations, and positive values in young readers. Dorian, I'm going to stop there because there's so much more we're going to unpack in our episode today. So, Dorian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I've been looking forward to this conversation. We've been connected online for a long time, but now recently actually had a chance to meet for the first time in person recently, right, in December of 2024. So I'm glad that we're actually able to have this conversation. Now, I'm going to give you a chance to do a little bit more bio rather than the stuff I said, right? So What is something, and I should have prepared you better. So if this is Dorian's fault, if this is tough because I didn't prepare her. Something about you that people would be surprised to learn.
Wow. So initially, I wanted to be an engineer.
Okay.
And I am also a first generation American. Both my mom and my dad are from Jamaica.
And where were you? Where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh yeah, the largest Caribbean country. I was born there too.
That's right. See?
Yeah.
And I wanted to be an engineer. In my high school, I was doing robotics and transistors and all those things. But a Caribbean mother did not see engineering for me or for women in general. So she said, no, she thought engineers were pretty much those who climbed light poles. And she was like, no daughter of mine is going to become an engineer. And she was like, you're not doing that. And then I was like, well, I also like to write. And she was like, well, who makes any money off of that? When you get your bachelor's degree, you've got to be able to start running. Like you gotta be able to make money from day one of graduation. And I was like, oh, okay. Let me go back to the drawing board. And then I was like, I do like healthcare, but I also like business, which was a combination of my mom and dad. My mom is a nurse, and my dad, he was an accountant. And so I was like, oh, I do like math. I love math, and I do like healthcare from a public health standpoint. I'm gonna marry the two. And I was like, third choice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a healthcare administrator. She was like, yes, we could take that. And so I went to Morgan State, shout out to Morgan State, went there and started what I thought was a career in healthcare management. So I got my bachelor's, I got my master's in public health, my bachelor's in healthcare management. And I was like, that's what I'm going to be. And I started off that way. And life just made a pivot.
Okay. Don't get us there too far. So talk to us about your career in healthcare administration. Like, was it something that, even though, like you mentioned, it wasn't first choice or second choice, but was it something that you found fulfillment in? Like, talk to us about how that role was for you.
So, being a Black woman and being someone from Brooklyn, we're a little more tougher than, and no offense to anyone from any other state, we just tend to be a little bit tougher. And so when I started working in healthcare, my very first internship and my very first job, I started out directly into management. Actually, that's not true. I started in health and in health insurance, understanding the health insurance side, and then moved into working for a hospital. And I was the youngest. I was the only African-American supervisor that sat in a room of older, more corporate looking management. And no matter what was said, no matter harsh it was like, oh, they didn't mean it. And it was pretty hard to kind of gather around, kind of wanting to lash back the way that a Jamaican, Brooklyn, New York person would. And so you have to relearn kind of reteach yourself. And so I did that and went into career and started moving into the role. Started working also in systems within healthcare. So I wasn't only just a supervisor working and understanding the ins and out of the hospital. I then also started kind of also preparing hospitals how to get into systems. So still ended up doing somewhat of a engineering
I was going to say
role.
And that's the engineering mindset.
It's a healthcare engineering mindset anyway. So
and we'll get to the other part of the writing stuff, right? Interesting.
Right. And so I had to write instructions to teach my staff and kind of get them prepared. But it was very stressful. And probably about, I guess it was maybe 2010 or so, maybe even before that, I was getting really frustrated in this role. And I decided I was going to write daily devotions for myself, and then I would send it out to a few friends on email. So I'd write one and I would send it out, and my friends was like, oh, that's so great. And I was like, okay. And I would send another one, and they would forward it to their coworkers and their friends. And let's say if they were not there that day, it was like, I didn't get they would literally send me an email. I don't know who these people were.
Like
and they
Monday
would
to Friday? Are you doing this Monday to Friday?
Monday through Friday.
Wow.
Every day. And they was like, I didn't get it. And I don't want to have to get it as a forward. Can you just add me to your email list? And I was like, okay. And I literally started doing that for it was probably about 9 months or so that I would get up and I would get content and I would email. And sometimes they would be kind of quirky and funny. Some had Caribbean accents included into it with an English translation for those who are completely, American. And that's what I did. And someone said, these are good. You should package them up and make them into devotional. And I was like, no, I don't see that for me. And but I use it to encourage myself, but also to encourage others. And I want to piggyback and go back to say, I didn't see myself as an author anymore. You know, I made straight A's in English in high school, which was great. But when I got to college, I made straight C's.
In English.
So in English, but not because of the content. My teachers loved the content, but once you get further south, the commas and the and the
Yeah.
howevers and the buts need to they just do things differently, and they would
Yeah.
dock me for everyone. And I mustered up a C. I just want to say I didn't make like a strong C. I
Yeah. Yeah.
mustered
Yeah.
up to make a C.
You're like, what's
So
that? What's
bad
that
so the
line there?
fourth,
What's that line?
yeah,
Yeah.
just at the line. And it was so bad that because I was good at math, I would always take a math class with my English class so I could still
That
keep my B
GPA.
average,
Yeah.
because I knew I knew I was making a C, but I knew I didn't have to strive as hard in math. And I was like, all right, math and English, get my B, call it a day. And I was like, I'm making straight C's in English. I'm never gonna be a writer. Let me go back to my healthcare. Let me do what I do best. Let me, I'm also a firstborn. I have two other siblings. I'm a boss, I boss my siblings around. So I'm gonna just stay into healthcare, not realizing that God had a purpose for me
Wow.
and really wanted me at a certain place in my life. But I was like, it's not happening.
I gotta
So
stop you. I gotta stop you. So our guest today
yeah,
is Dorian Stewart from Dorian Inspires, author, illustrator. So Dorian, I want you to talk to me about this book. So not this book, but these devotions. 9 months, 5 days a week. So that's about that's 20 a month, about 180 emails you've been sending out. And how many people would you say now are on this email list
So
getting
we
this?
started out at 10 to the point where we were about 110 emails
Oh, okay.
every day.
110 people are getting this stuff, asking for it. And by the way, because I'm connected with you online, your personality comes out in your postings. So I'm sure it was coming out in those emails. And someone says to you,
Yes.
write a book.
Yeah.
Did you write that? Did you take any of those?
Absolutely not. I did not. I did not. And
Please tell me you have that email account so we can go back and get those devotionals.
so here's the interesting part.
Okay.
10 years pass.
Mhm.
And I stopped around 9 months because work started getting busy. And I was like, okay. But 10 years pass. I get married, and I even print them out in a Word document, stapled them together, and I gave them to my mom, my dad, I think my grandmother, a few other people, but within my family. And I was like, I wrote this. You guys don't have email anyway. Let me give this to you. And my mother was like, these are awesome. And why isn't this in a book? And I was like, Mom, I'm too busy. I don't have time. And my husband said, this is now I'm married, and my husband says, get her done. Get it done. He
Shout
was
out
like,
to your husband. Shout out to your
shout
husband.
out to Patrick Stewart. And
There
he
you
was
go.
like, get it done. And I was like, Patrick, I don't have time to market this. We want to start a family. We don't have time. I don't have, he was like, get it done. We'll figure it out. Get it done. And so I wrote my very first devotional called My 2 Cents. And literally, my 2 cents. That's what I called it.
I love it.
And I did it with a one of those hybrid publishers, Christian Faith Publishing. And I learned a lot. I learned about the process. I learned about what the illustration and whether or not it's worth having it in there, and what you're trying to portray as it relates to the cover. Having other editors look at it to say, does this make sense? Can I get to the same process or the same understanding that you did when you wrote it? So let's be real. When we write, there are a lot of things going on in our head. And we can get to the end of the story and understand it. But can someone outside who has no clue as to what you're writing still get to the same point and still get the same message the way you did? And I learned all of these things. Now, granted, at that point, right after I wrote the book, the pandemic happened.
Mhm.
So when they were supposed to help me market it, and I was supposed to go to book fairs. And so none of that happened. And the book was out there, but there was a lesson to
Yeah.
learn in the process of how to write my books.
So
And I was
now
like, okay,
I gotta pause you because I
yeah.
think you just said something because we're gonna get to what you're doing now in a little
Mhm.
bit. But is somebody who might have, just like you did, were you disappointed then after you, I'm sure you invested a lot of money
Mhm.
and time, right, to package it, get it done,
Mhm.
and here comes the pandemic, all the things that you had planned. Was there any time, any point in that time? Because I know you can look back on it, what, 5 years later and say, I
Mhm.
see it. But was there at any point where you started feeling a little bit of discouragement, like disappointment? Oh my goodness, did I waste my money? Did I waste my time? Should I not have? Talk to us.
I I I did feel like that because I was like, oh man, the pandemic. I had plans to go to different churches and talk about my devotion and, kind of maybe speak. I'm not a pastor, but I am an ordained elder. And I
All
was
right.
gonna go and maybe
Yeah.
to the churches that still did AY. I had a whole plan out here
That's youth
because
services,
again,
right? That's youth
yes. So
services. Yeah.
my healthcare management says you plan out, you write things on paper, you figure out how you're gonna do this, and you get there. And I literally, none of that happened. So outside of maybe social media and saying, hey guys, I wrote a book, and my friends was like, oh great. And that's pretty much where it went. And
Wow.
I thought it was a failure. I'm gonna be
Wow.
honest. I thought it was a
Wow.
failure. I was like,
Mm. You know,
and then on top
yeah.
of that, I was like, who's gonna want to read my book, especially after I was giving out the day by day to people on email.
Yeah.
But again, for me in my life, I can't speak for anybody else. When I get a chance to really take a look back and see where God was taking me in the path, I understand. And yes, there's some highs and some lows, some happies and sads, but I got to understand like, okay, yes, this book didn't go where I thought it would go, but I learned so much in the process that allowed me to now write the books that I write now. Now, granted, as far as I was concerned, I was done. I'm not writing no more books because I didn't, I wasn't
Yeah.
New York Times seller or anywhere near that. And so I was like, I'm done.
Now
And
you make a good point here. Like we judge and we call something a failure, a disappointment too soon.
yeah,
Like give that thing some time, man. Give that thing some time to see the lessons, see what you can take from it and reuse it.
yeah,
Right. So now you're getting there to now, right? Because I just
yes,
read in your bio 10 books. Hold on, let me make
yes,
sure I say it right, right? Because gotta give people their props. Collection of 10 books,
yeah,
2 devotional coloring books. So how do we get to from that one that's like, I'm done, right?
yeah.
I'm done to now 10 books and 2 coloring. Talk to us now, and
All
I'm
right.
sure we're gonna fill in some gaps.
So in the process of finishing up the book, we were also, my husband and I will also beginning the process of adoption. We had
Mhm.
decided we were going to adopt, and we had to go to a lot of classes. Again, we started the process, let's say November of 2019. And just as we began the process, which began with a home inspection from the health department and the fire department to make sure that our sprinkler system works and we have fire extinguishers in the right place. That exact day that we were supposed to have the home inspections, they shut down the entire country, the whole world shut down the day.
Wow.
So the fire department came and they said we can only be in there for about a couple minutes. They quickly checked everything and they were out. We passed. And I was waiting for the health department. And the health department said, and I'm going to quote, we are closed and we will reschedule your home inspection when the pandemic is over. Please call back when the pandemic is over, and we will reschedule your interview.
Wow. When the pandemic is, which by the way,
When the pandemic is over.
which of
And
course we
I was
all
like,
knew it was gonna last like a couple days then, right? Of course,
that's what
like
and that's what they were thinking too.
yeah.
And so we couldn't do anything. So we began, there's a process in that we have to also take some classes. It teaches us about children and how sometimes there is negative thoughts about adoption. Sometimes children don't like their specific birthday because to them it's the day that someone gave them up. So they don't necessarily see it as a positive light. People around them and kids aren't always taught that, hey, you're chosen and cherished. And so that resonated within me and my husband. And I was like, man, I don't want, I didn't know whether we were having a boy or girl. I was like, I don't want our child to feel that way. And maybe I could see myself maybe writing something for our child. That was it. That was my thought process. And I was like, I want them to know they're chosen and cherished. When we had to write also a kind of like a little book for the birth parents in general. And that was one of the things that we shared in there. We said, we're going to let you know, and that we are going to tell our child that this decision was made in love, that you made this decision by choosing us, if you choose us, in love. And we are going to always let our child know that you made the decision in love, and this would not be a negative thing to our child. And we submitted our book the first time, and we were chosen, literally.
Wow.
Our daughter we were chosen January 9th. Nyla's her name. Shout out to Nyla Stewart. She was supposed to be born on the 16th, and she was born literally on the 11th. So a couple days after we were chosen, she was born, like 2 days later.
Wow.
And even then, I was like, in my back of my mind, I was like, I'm going to write a story. But at this point now, I'm about to be a mom. I don't, I was like, I don't have time. And I was at the time, I was still working as a healthcare administrator. And it just, I think in the back of my head, I kept hearing Patrick say, get it done, get it done, get it done. And I was like, I just don't know how to write this story. I don't know. Is it going to be something that she's going to read years on, or is it going to
So this was just for Nyla now. This is not
just for Nyla.
Wow,
this was not for anyone else. This was just for Nyla.
Come on.
I wanted her to be very clear and understanding that she was chosen and cherished. And one day she was sleeping, and I was just like, okay. And the thought came, what about, and then I said, I literally wrote a similar story to hers. And I was like, no, I want to switch it up a little bit. I don't want to make it, but I wrote the story out that literally was her story. Let me backtrack. I wrote the story that was actually hers. And then I also was like, man, make sure we put some scriptures in it so that she can claim that. And that's how, and I wrote it out on a literally pen to paper, and then to a Word document, and saved it. And I was like, okay, how am I going to introduce this to her? I don't know. I have no clue.
What year are we now, Dorian? What year are we?
So I wrote the story. She was probably about 1. So at this point, at 1 year old, I had to let my job go because my husband got a promotion, and we were moving from Hanover, Maryland. And my husband got a promotion, and we're now living in the Huntsville area in Alabama. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom, and I'm going to be a homeschool mom, and we're going to see how this works. And now I could now take this Word document, and I'm going to print it out, and I will read her the story because she can't read. So that's perfect.
Yeah.
And I was like, but wouldn't this be awesome if she could see the pictures, and as you know, as she grows, she'll see the pictures along with it. And that's how the process is beginning. And I was like, I don't know how to draw. So I'm literally debating with myself because it's like, wouldn't this be great? I don't know how to draw. Put that document back down. And it literally was going that way. And I was on Instagram, and this lady came up on my feed and said, do you want to learn how to illustrate your child's book? And I was like, let me just keep on looking. And then I saw the process. She was like, you can use this software. You can type out what you want. And I took the class, and I was like, oh. And I took my book and I cut it up, into pages, and literally put the pictures to the actual document.
You gotta hold on. I'm gonna give you a solo shot so you could show it to us. Here we go. Wow, look at this.
This is the little girl. And I switched it up a little bit because I didn't want, if I was gonna make this public, didn't want to tell her exact story, because I felt like her story is her story to tell in regards to her adoption. But the story still conveys that she is chosen, cherished, and loved. And anybody who knows me, I'm gonna go to the particular page. That is the hairstyle I had back then when we adopted her. If anybody even, and literally that was my husband and I. Like, we were suits people. We were, going in, and we began to write. I began to write this story. This was my very first story. Even to the day of when we fully adopted her, she was in a pacifier. We were on Zoom, and she was about 9 or so months old. And she raised her little hand with her pacifier as we swore to the judge that we would love her as if we birthed her ourselves.
Wow. Listen, y'all, those of you watching this, y'all know y'all got some tears in your eyes. This thing is so moving. This is such a good story. Now, what I'm curious. So this was for Nyla. This is Nyla's story. You're writing this. Then you start. Yes. What made you now start thinking, okay, I need to possibly sell this book? And did you have any reservations, right? Talk to me if you had any, like, no, I shouldn't.
So the reservations is real, because again, I wrote a book already and it didn't work out. And I was like, who's going to buy my book? And I again started seeing where, hey, you can use KDP and self-publish. And I was like, I'll self-publish, but I'm not going to hybrid publish. And my husband and I were talking about it, and I was like, who's going to really want to read this book? Yes, it has some great pictures in it. And he was like, you got to get this done. And he was like,
get it done.
How many?
Come on now.
He was like, how many other kids out there that are adopted, and even if they're not adopted, could really love the story? And I was like, I'm not paying for another hybrid publisher again. That was my thought process. And I found out that there was KDP. So that is the Kindle Direct Publishing, for those who are not aware of KDP. And I was like, I'm going to try and put it out there. So I went through the process, and I wrote it, put it in a book, and KDP allows you to get a proof of your book. So you'll see it has this little line across it that says "not for resale."
I got one right now for my thing. It's right
there. You go. There you go.
Yeah.
And so I took the book first, and I gave it to my cousin. I gave it to a bunch of, I have a few family members that live here, and I gave it to them, and I was like, hey, can you read this book? Can you see if this makes any sense? And they read the book, and they made some corrections to it. And I said, okay. And then I said, let me take this to Pfeiffer and see if this makes any sense to them. Because again, the editing, and in the back of my mind, you made straight C's in English. You need to make sure this makes sense. And so that's what I did. And I was like, okay. And he was like, oh, this is great. You should put it out there. So I put it out there, and I was like, that's my one book. I'm done.
You're done.
And I'm going to send out emails to a bunch of people who I know. So I sent it out to a couple of churches. I reached out to a couple of conferences. And I was like, all right, did my job. And I got no responses. And God said, you still got to do more. And I said, I'm gonna do a devotional coloring book. And actually, no, I said, I'm going to do a coloring book. And I said, I need something for Nyla to do while I am in church so that I can hear the word and get my worship on. She can color. And so it needs to be something that is religious inspired and I could have my worship on. And I was like, what a great way. I'm going to do who God is from A to Z. So God is awesome. God is a builder. He's compassionate.
Yeah.
And I did that. I was like, okay. And God said, you could do better than that. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm going to put a scripture. So with every A for awesome, there would be a scripture that had awesome and how God is awesome and how he's a builder or how he's a zealous God or how he's a yes, God, amen. And God said, you could do better than that. And I was like, oh, man. I was like, this is a kid's book, and this was supposed to be just for Nyla. And I wrote a message. So it had maybe a 1 or 2 sentence about how God is awesome and about based off of the scripture. And they were coloring in that coloring book. And God said, you could do better than that. And I included let's pray on the next page. God, we thank you for being an awesome God. Help us and our family to also be God awesome. In Jesus' name, amen. And he was like, okay, now we got something. And so I literally did.
You co-wrote this. You co-wrote this book with God. Co-author.
I sure did.
Yeah.
I literally did. And then at the end of the book, I wrote a final message, like an appeal, and said, this came from my heart. And that if you want to know more about God, find your local pastor or reach out to your parent or guardian, because this is who God is, and he wants to get to know you better. And I wrote it as childlike as I could possibly can, so that even if I was reading it to Nyla, she could somewhat understand what I was trying to say. And that's what we did. And there was my book. There was my coloring book. The funny thing about the coloring book is that it was more than 26, because then I was like, we're going to do A to Z. Then we're going to say who you could be in God. And my husband was like, that's a lot. Why don't you cut it in half? And I was like, oh, that makes sense. So literally I did 2 devotional books, but I had spent time doing one full book that would probably end up being like 100 and let's say 4 pages. I ended up doing 226, actually 52, because the second page is a prayer relating to the first page. So literally, and that's what I did. And I called them Promise Pals because that's God's promise to his kids about who we can be with him by our side. And that's how Promise Pals and the book came along. And even going back to the stories, I used to be a Pathfinder director.
And I want to get to that, yeah.
So I used to be a Pathfinder director.
And for those who don't know, Pathfinders is like a youth organization. It's similar to Boy Scout.
And Girl Scout, if you want to look at it, but it's a combined together. And so I was a Pathfinder leader and at 2 churches in Baltimore, Maryland. And began writing stories about an adventure kid because I wanted it to relate to the kids that I was trying to reach out. And this little boy gets lost. And I want to make it very clear, I need to start this disclaimer, as a Pathfinder leader and as a volunteer, I never, ever lost a child. So I never lost a child. But it's about a little boy who got lost while going camping. And he was afraid of the dark. And then he remembers the things that he learns while being an adventurer. And I need to also preface that in the book, I don't use the word adventure. I use the adventure-ish, just in case,
Yeah. You got to get permission for stuff like that, right?
So the adventure-ish young boy got lost and remembered certain things. And in the book, it also includes a little bit about the importance of how and what you should bring when you go hiking.
Wait, so you wrote this as a part of this series now here in the what
Yeah,
you're
so I
doing.
started to write a series because
Nice.
more stories kept coming, and I was just like, I thought I was only writing one book and one coloring book,
So,
and the
I mean,
stories just kept coming and coming, and I was just like,
you know what's
I
interesting? I don't know if you're seeing this right, but you mentioned I used to work with youth for all these years, right? I was writing this devotional and sending it to people, right? I have this systems background, right? Where, and I don't know if you're seeing it, but I see it. And I don't know if those of you
yeah,
who are watching this and listening to this are hearing it and seeing it, but it's like all of that you've done is kind of coming together in what you're doing now. And in
yeah,
Nyla's story, now
yeah.
being that catalyst and the thing that just kind of moves you into action.
And I guess I need to also preface, you're going to probably wonder how old I am, but I also did media for Miracle City. So Miracle
A
City
church
was
in
on, it's a church in Baltimore, Maryland. And I was the editor and producer at one point. They used to be on CW Baltimore every Sunday morning. And I edited and produced. And so while editing, it allows your mind to see things differently. Movies don't look the same anymore. How you layer things and put things together does not look the same anymore. Like literally being an editor, shout out to editors, it literally messes how you see movies because it's like, you could have did that better or you could have cut it before you got to there. And so literally putting a children's book together and then adding layers to it, meaning if you're gonna draw a kitchen, are you gonna have a blender in there? Are you gonna have,
Mm,
all the little things that then kind of puts the story together, then has to now be placed in there. So all of the things of being a Pathfinder director and a media director and a systems manager and all of those things kind of put together now allowed me to understand how to write the books that I'm writing and also kind of see it from a child's perspective because every one of my books, my daughter, I've read to her and she can tell you this is Mackenzie or um, this is Harper, and because she's one of my reviewers, and so
nice.
if she's into the story, then I know I've got at
It's
least
a good
one or
story.
two people that will like the story too.
Tori, I mean, this is like, okay, so one, for those who are watching this, um, I do think a lot of the volunteer experiences that we have, we discount them.
Yes.
We think of work experience only paid work. We think of work experience only things that we went to school for. But even as you think about for someone thinking about starting a business, starting something, don't overlook that volunteer experience
Yeah.
because you learn a lot and stuff
Mhm.
comes out of you in that process. So this you're a great example of one saying yes to volunteer experiences because a lot of people were like, no, I don't have time for that. It sounds like
Yeah,
you
I
allow
don't do
yourself.
free. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying you do free all the time, but it is important. I will
Yeah.
tell you that my very first job in healthcare management was because I was able to. I was interviewing and I was, putting out my degree and, all this experience I had. And he was like, "But you don't really look like you have a lot of management experience." And I said, "Well, I work as a Pathfinder director and I handle budgets because as a Pathfinder
Mhm.
director, you have to handle your budget
There
for
you
the
go.
year
There you go.
and say, hey, board, I need X amount of dollars to help do the things that we need to do. Here's how I plan things out. Who have you chosen to work with you? So not necessarily hiring. And I did tell him, I said, working volunteer is a lot harder than working,
Absolutely.
um, an actual
Say
paid
that
position
again. Yeah.
because volunteer, they don't have to stay. So you
That's
have to
right.
figure out a way to keep your team along
Motivated.
and motivated and still committed to what they said in January all the way till you get to December. And he was like, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And I got hired based off
Nice.
of telling him that I was, in addition to my degrees, I was also a Pathfinder director
So
in a
Dorian, there's some
volunteer
questions.
job.
There's some questions. I know I'm not, and we low on time, so I'm gonna try to give you these rapid fire because I'm sure those watching this they got so many questions. But tell me your writing process.
Okay.
Like do you sit down every day or on a regular basis to write, or do you write when there's inspiration? Like, what's your process?
It's a little of both. So I walk with a notebook and pen everywhere. And if I have to, I will literally pull over if I have the time, and I will literally write. An idea will come to me, or I'll see something, and I'll write that note down, and then I can flush it out a little bit longer, or when I have the time.
Nice.
This particular story, which is kind of a sad story, but I am comforted and not alone. It's about a little girl who loses her grandfather. I was literally sitting in church, and the pastor said, this person passed and that person passed. And the thought came, wow, we know how adults feel when losing a loved one. I wonder how children must feel in the process.
Wow, that's so
And
good.
literally, I love my church. I love my senior pastor, but I did not hear the sermon that day. God literally gave me the thought process. He gave me the scripture to use, which was Matthew 5, verse 4. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted, which started the actual title, I Am Comforted and Not Alone. And I literally wrote the book, or kind of outlined the whole story. And I said, I'm going to do a little girl who loses her grandfather. I don't even know why I chose grandfather, but it just happened to be that way. And I wrote the book. And or not necessarily in like picture form or actual, but I wrote it out and then put it in a Word document. And I literally wrestled with God on finishing the book, because I said, God, all the other stories are so light and airy, and this one is just so dark and heavy. I just can't. I feel like it's gonna mess with all the other Promise Pal books. There were even books that I finished and published before putting this one out. This one was done or was written out, and I said, I don't know how I feel. So I started making excuses, and I gave the Word document to a friend who is a school resource counselor, and I said, hey, read this and tell me how you feel about it. Then I gave it to two child psychologists, and I said, hey, why don't you read this and tell me what you feel about it? And they were like, this is a great story and you should put it out there. And I was just like, well, don't you think it's so heavy? It's so depressing. And it was like, no, put it out there. And I was like, all right. And I said, God, if you can help me get the illustrations done, because sometimes it can be difficult to really, kind of get through that. And I put the book out there. And so July 3rd, I completed the book.
Wow.
I think I went to bed at like 2 a.m. that morning, because I finished and uploaded it to KDP, the Kindle Direct Publishing. And July 4th, the very next day, my dad passed away.
Oh, no.
Not realizing that God wanted me to get this particular book done, because he knew, one, I wouldn't write this book after he passed. But he also knew that my daughter needed this book, and my nieces needed this book, and my nephews needed this book, and other children needed this book. Literally, from, if you think about when the pandemic started, they've lost, as children, have lost so many people, whether it's a pet or a distant family member. They've experienced loss as well, and to ignore that they're just gonna be okay, even though we still struggle with the grief, we still struggle with losing that loved one, they're also going through something, and they're going through 5 stages of grief as well. And literally, I realized at that point that when God asked me to do something, I've got to move. And even though I struggle with doubt, and I've told you, you've given me an exercise to work on, I still struggle with doubt as to whether people are going to get my stories or get and understand my stories. But I recognize that God literally wanted me to write these books for not just my daughter and not just for my family, but so many people out there are struggling, and so I started writing books on online safety and children going through depression, even one on bullying that I'm just now finishing up. So I literally wrote one on I am empowered and I am forgiven, because there are children that are going through bullying, And sometimes when they are bullied, they tend to portray that bullying onto someone
That's
else.
right.
So
That's
it
right.
then tends to be a domino effect. And so I began writing a book on that. And then I wrote my last one, because I got to put health in there, and wrote a book on the importance of being healthy. So
I love it.
those are the two that makes, even though I've written 10 and 10 are published, two more are coming out pretty soon.
Listen, Dorian, you got to teach a class on how to write all these children's books. But look, this has been what I love about this is you're showing us, for someone, you might think my story is just for me, and you are evidence that when I share my story, it will bless someone that
Yeah.
I may never meet, right?
Yeah.
And Dorian, I just want to affirm you for stepping out, for doing this. This has been inspirational to me. Tell people, because as you talk about these stories, their parents are watching this. There are family members of who have children, right? Grandkids. I got nieces and a nephew. Tell us how we can find your work. Tell us where we can connect with you. Because one of the things, plug, Dorian is available to do is come speak to your youth, to your parents, to your children, to your
Schools.
class. So tell us how we can connect with you.
So to get to my books directly, it's www.dorianinspires.com.
Mm-hmm. Right down the
And if
screen.
you want to reach out to me directly for any speaking engagements, it would be author, AUTHOR, if I spelled that correctly, at DorianInspires.com. So author at DorianInspires.com.
And for
I've
those who
had
are
some.
listening, I'm going to spell the word Dorian for you just because I want to
Oh,
make sure you
yes.
get it. It's DORIAN, and inspires, INSPIRES.
And so I've had some really great engagement with children. I've went to a Christian school here, Oakwood Academy, and was able to actually do two of my books on being fearless and resilient, and also on online safety, and really teaching kids that they can be fearless and resilient, and a winner, or they can be wise and make the wise decisions, and also helping their children. And I think one of the things that I wanted to make sure with all of these books is that parents can also use these books in worship. They can use it to begin a discussion, to say, hey, are you feeling sad? Or, we just lost your pet, or we're moving. To kids, I just want to make it very clear, grief comes to them differently. Grief can be moving, because they're moving out of their neighborhood and they feel like they're losing their friends. It can be losing a pet. It can be losing a loved one. So to them, anything that kind of disrupts what they are. And so they could go through their 5 stages of grief just the same way we do. We look at it only from a death standpoint, but they're children. They see it differently.
A friend
And
moving away.
it's just moving away. And so it's something that's different for them. And one of the things is that I wanted to make sure that in some of the books that are a little bit more heavier, that there are resources in the back that parents can then use and say, hey, are you feeling like this? And again, I make it very clear, even though I have a master's in public health, I am not a mental health professional. And so there are websites and go-tos and
Excellent.
ways that these are just my suggestions. They're not, the end all, but it's a way to begin that conversation. My husband and I love to use the story sometimes in our worship, and actually see my daughter say, I know that I'm fearless, I'm resilient,
Love it.
I'm a
I love
winner,
it. I
and
love it.
it's important for her, even now that she's just turned 4, that she is also claiming, with God, I am whatever it is that we're trying to teach her. Positive affirmations are something, especially with biblical values, is something that we as adults want our children to grow up kind of moving into confidence, and knowing that with God, they can actually do what God has called them to do. And even as her mom struggles with the very thing I'm trying to teach her, at least she's seeing the growth, from my standpoint, and also actually teaching her that she could be even stronger than her mom. So
Listen, put a round of applause to you. Those of you who are watching this, you know you got to share this with someone. Please share this. I'm going to put that website up again. It's DorianInspires.com. Here's my challenge to anyone watching this: buy a book, at least one, right? Because you can buy it for someone in your family, you can buy it for a child in your neighborhood, at your church. You know someone who could benefit from this. And as you can tell, this is someone who has a heart to help children with a wonderful story. Dorian, thank you so much for being a
thank you
guest
so
on our
much for having
podcast
me.
today, sharing your story. Somebody's going to be inspired. Somebody's sitting on a document in their computer right now that you need to go ahead and get that thing published. Someone's sitting on a talk. Someone is sitting on an event that they want to do with people.
Yes.
Someone's sitting on a product. Listen, whatever it is that you're sitting on, let Dorian's story
Get her
be.
done.
Yes. Patrick Stewart's words, get her done. Let
Get
that
her
be your
done.
inspiration today. Dorian, thank you for living up to your name. Dorian inspires. And for those of you who are watching this, take what you learned here and go increase your income and your impact.
Thank you for listening to the Monetize Your Ministry podcast with Kymone Hines. For more information, visit our website at www.monetizeyourministrypodcast.com. That's www.monetizeyourministrypodcast.com. Find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Please share this episode with someone who needs it. Let's increase our income and impact.